Hello everyone, welcome to another Sunday. To start, as usual, this is where you can get today's soundtrack at the end. For those of you who are new, we listen with headphones because we're doing all kinds of things with brainwave entrainment and with synchronizing of the hemispheres. And we're attempting with these live streams to do a massive group mind link by having everyone's brainwaves entrained to the same exact brainwave entrainment frequency so that we create a network of coupled oscillating brainwaves of everyone's brains together in sync with each other. Power in numbers. And this is where you can go to ask a question or make a comment on anything that I'm covering in these live streams. scientificsounds.com/ask a question. And here is where you can go to find all the live streams that I've done up to the present time. And if you're new, it would be a good idea to go back and watch them from the beginning because each one builds on information from the one before. And I'll constantly make references, like I will today, to previous live streams where I've discussed some of the issues I'm just touching on this time, where I devote entire live streams or a big section of them to that issue. I think to begin, it's fair to warn everyone that today is going to be deeply psychedelic and probably entering into places that are going to stretch your mind into regions that are perhaps unknown or deeper than you thought you knew. Quantum mind, quantum brain, quantum processings, all of that. Just to reiterate from last time, where we started, we were talking about the mind-blowing physics of photosynthesis, where I had discussed that photosynthesis, the leaf, the lowly leaf, is the cosmic interface between the life-giving power of the sun, which produces massive amounts of photons, energy particles of light, pure energy in the electromagnetic spectrum, and organic life on any kind of planet. So with our planet, the interface between the sun and sunbeams and photons is the leaf and chlorophyll, and how chlorophyll traps and captures photons, energy packets from the sun, and converts those into chemical compounds, sugars, oxygen. It combines CO2 and water, and the sunbeam breaks it all down. It does a process, and it comes out with creating sugars for life and oxygen for you and me. A mind-blowing symbiotic relationship that goes on where the leaf is the interface between Earth and the cosmos. The magical process of a photon coming down and striking a chlorophyll, and then a quantum process is involved. It's not just striking and creating those chemicals. There's a quantum process that must be involved with resonating distant chlorophylls in a quantum cascade process where light takes the water from the roots and through a series of processes breaks that water down so that the oxygen is released. The two oxygens are released. It retains the hydrogen. The hydrogen is used in a process when at nighttime when sun is not there, called the dark stage, where CO2 is extracted from the environment, which we breathe out, and the oxygen is stripped away, so we now have carbon and hydrogen, and those begin this chemical process in here called what used to be called the Krebs cycle. Now it's called the Calvin cycle, where the carbon and the hydrogen is combined together and forms sugars, which is what the plant uses to grow and to be alive, and what we need when we eat plants in order for us to be alive. And then I touched on this little chart here, the quantum computers and biology, the quantum effects in the brain and the mind, where the same kind of weird quantum processes that we see in photosynthesis in the plant world, we see also in ourselves, in human beings, where, the mind has strange features, and so does the tiny world of atoms. Mind can instantly link to an almost infinite number of different associations, and that's a quantum effect. This part, this lower part here, where it begins to equate the ever small brain mechanisms and photosynthesis, where green plant life and red organic life meet together. Counterintuitive properties of particles at a very small size. These include superposition, all few once, coherence, many different parts of the system staying in sync without a clear mechanism of doing so, although I call that the science of coupled oscillators, why the wine glass vibrates when you sing the right note, and the foundation of music theory, the theory of octaves and harmonic resonance. I ping the wine glass, sing that note, that's direct resonance. I sing any octave of that note, the wine glass vibrates. I sing any harmonic of that note, the wine glass vibrates. And this mechanism of coupled oscillators is the key to it. And the medium of the coupled oscillators arising is all kinds of different things. It can be plasma, gas, liquid, solid, and things unknown. And it's my proposition that the things unknown at the deepest core of reality in the quantum field, where we break the smallest particle possible open, and there's nothing inside except energy pattern relationships in a state of vibration forming standing waves. And the standing waves are nested together in mathematical ratios that we see in music theory: harmonics, overtones, fractional value relationships, octaves, where they nest together nicely and weave together nicely. And they weave so tightly and they stack so perfectly that they appear to be solid when you stand far enough away from them. And the solidity of what they look like is this: you and me and the universe. Everything we see is not solid at all. It's just nested standing waves of something vibrating. And the ancient text, that something is consciousness itself in the quantum field. And that resonance is forming what? An idea. And this is the idea. You, me, and all of this is the idea. Entanglement, strange connections of particles even at a great distance. And once again, I think entanglement is just another property of coupled oscillator networks. And quantum tunneling. Matter being in two places at once, since it is both a particle and a wave at the same time. These various behaviors of matter in the neuron might explain the rapid action and connections among neurons to produce consciousness and mental events. So excuse me, but I don't agree with that, because I think that I agree with the Sutras of Patanjali and the most ancient texts on earth, that consciousness comes first. And indeed, more and more and more quantum physicists are making statements to the effect that consciousness is a requirement for reality to exist. And that means that there is no objective reality. There's no objective body here unless there's consciousness to witness it. And that means that consciousness comes first and the body appears in the field. But in reality, from Einstein's equation E equals mc squared, where E is energy and m is matter, energy and matter equal each other. It's the same thing, two different forms of the same thing. So therefore, consciousness itself is the most refined form of matter, and matter is the most condensed form of consciousness. It's the chicken and egg, it's the yin and yang, it's the one. There is no such thing as one coming before the other, because that would require us to have linear dimensions, and we know it's not linear, it's holographic. So everything happens at the same time simultaneously. A question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, is a meaningless question, because nothing comes before something else. That implies time, and time is an illusion. From a quantum field, everything is happening simultaneously in the present moment, all past and future events. So this excuse me, leads us to our talk about the quantum brain, the quantum aspects of the processes we see happening in the brain, where, normally the brain is looked upon as a computer, and computers are 0, 1, a classic bit, where, calculations in a computer happen linearly, one calculation after another in a string, where the language of computers is zeros and ones, on and off, positive and negative, or whatever. But quantum processing is an infinite value of calculations all happening at the same time. It's 0 and it's 1 and it's maybe. It's maybe is, one of the hallmarks of the quantum field, Schrodinger's cat paradox, where superposition happens. In other words, and previous live streams I've covered this in great detail, the Schrodinger cat paradox and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Schrodinger cat paradox, cat's in the box with the lid on, you shake the box and either a hammer drops or not and breaks a bottle of cyanide and either kills the cat or it doesn't. But until later on you open the lid to take a look, the cat exists in a twilight zone of / living dead cat, superposition of both states, and one of those two doesn't pop into existence until consciousness arrives to witness what took place. And that means that when I look, and let's say there's a dead cat, I just created the past event where the cat actually died when I shook the box, because it hasn't. It's not alive or dead until I look, and I look later down the line and create the future event. And even though that seems sort of crazy, it's because time is an illusion. It's not linear. Time is all events simultaneously. All events that could possibly take place in all past and future events all happen simultaneously now in a quantum field. It's our mind that cherry picks out moment after moment after moment out of that infinite field and thinks that it's here and now and only this, when in reality it's everything and we're only looking at one and stringing those together, and that gives us a sense of time. But it's an illusion. So when we talk about the promise of quantum computing, where all available possibilities can be calculated in parallel to each other simultaneously, then the amount of information that can be processed is unimaginably larger than this simple little thing here. So the brain is really a quantum computer, and it's not even a computer, it's a field, it's a quantum field. It's all possibilities, and consciousness is cherry picking, moment by moment, depending on what it believes to be so, or wants to believe is so, or expects to be so. So out of the total quantum field, I'm expecting it to look this way. That's the one I see, which means I'm creating my own reality, moment by moment by moment, by my expectation. Which brings us to why we're here, what we're doing here with these live streams. That if we can align everybody's expectation to the same outcome, that outcome becomes the one that tips the quantum field, because there's powers and numbers. And if you have the minimum quantum number of people sort of thinking the same thought or expecting the same outcome, that's the outcome that becomes the path of least resistance for reality to pop into existence in the next moment from now. Our ability to work with the universe, to generate reality by managing large mind and managing our expectation of what the next moment is going to be, is why we're here, what we're trying to accomplish. And as far as quantum physicists are concerned, this becomes more and more every day through new research projects to be indicated as the actual way that reality is generated in the quantum field by consciousness. The quantum mind. And it's, for me, the quantum mind is first, and the quantum brain is the mechanism that quantum mind uses to translate its expectation into reality. This quantum mind of all possible states in the quantum field, where particles and vibrations all mix and match together, where the reality is a particle or a wave, is immaterial. It's a particle and a wave. It just depends on how you look at it, which one you want to focus on. Which brings us to the quantum mind, the quantum brain, using something called the default mode network, which I discussed at length before. I had a whole live stream based on the default mode network. Discovered in 2001 by accident. Discovered there's these four zones. There's these four zones in the brain that are tightly linked together and synchronized up. And these four zones also go down in between. But these four zones are tightly synchronized up together, and the four zones equal certain things about how I experience self. This frontal region up here, the precuneatus region, is where I get my sense of self on the inside of my skin. And this posterior occipital region is where I get my sense of self on the outside of my skin. So if you synchronize those up together, I get my normal sense of self in the middle. These two on the outside here, the parietal temporal zones, is where I get my sense of time. So sense of time is past leading up to the present, and present extending into the future as an anticipation. Then my sense of the present results from that. But now it appears that new research is fleshing out the default mode network and making it even more powerful. This is what the inside of the brain looks like. I have just happened, of course, to have a brain. It's a rubber brain, but a brain just the same. And so we can see these two hemispheres here. And the two hemispheres, split apart. And inside, we have the gray matter is extending all the way down inside. So the gray matter on the outside covers the outer 1/8 of an inch of the brain, the neurons, and extends all the way down across the edge onto the inside, all along this zone as well. And the default mode network starts here at the frontal zone, goes on the inside, and that's pretty much what they're trying to show in this picture here. This is the inside and the outside. So now we've got more regions that are showing up. So this is the frontal zone, the posterior zone, and the two parietal temporal zones. And now we have new zones that have been discovered are showing up in the hippocampus zone. And now we're getting into emotions and memory. And it goes on. There's more. These new images of the default mode network and all of its interconnections is brand new stuff. This is the frontal zone and the occipital zone and the two temporal parietal zones and all their connections with each other and other areas of the brain. Here's new information, much more complex. The anterior lobe and the posterior zone and the right and left temporal parietal zones and these new hippocampal zones and all of their connections. All of this, I could do a whole new live stream only on the default mode network with all the new discoveries that have been made with what's going on there. But the operating idea here is that as time has gone on, the default mode network has, represented 95% of all brain function. 95% of all brain function is this default mode function of the brain with all this tight synchronicity with a brainwave pulse that is extremely, extremely slow. One pulse every 10 seconds to one pulse every 20 seconds. The lowest delta brain frequency is 0.5. That's one pulse every 2 seconds. The epsilon frequencies I discovered in 1989 was half of that, 2 octaves below that. So 0.5 at delta would be 0.25, one pulse every 4 seconds. And half of that would be one pulse every 8 seconds. That's what I was dealing with epsilon, associated with out-of-the-body experiences, psychic development things, spiritual epiphanies, things like that, out-of-the-body experiences, precognitive ability. And I had discussed how we did, a study with 40 volunteers on increasing the ability, precognitive ability with epsilon brainwave entrainment. I have a whole episode on that. But this idea of sense of self and sense of time, when we begin to expand that, when we begin to use binaural beats to entrain the default mode network at one pulse every 10 seconds to one pulse every 20 seconds. We get alignment with research reports that have come through that show that extremely high states of meditation are associated with extreme levels of synchronicity of the default mode. So, synchronizing up the default mode by rotating the binaural beats in 3 dimensions through signal processing, phase relationship processing through headphones can bring us to extremely high states of meditation. They're calling it cosmic consciousness. Because if my sense of self on the inside of my skin versus the outside of my skin begins to expand, it becomes difficult to distinguish where the inside of my body ends and the universe begins, because all of a sudden the inside of my body is perceived to be universally large. That sounds like cosmic consciousness to me. And my sense of time, my sense of the present moment begins to expand out into all past and all future events, which sounds like a quantum mind to me. Eternal present in all past and future. And this goes all the way down into the deep regions of the basic primary blueprint of life itself. That somebody designed this blueprint, and somebody read this blueprint to design my body, differentiate all the cells and tissues into everything I am, and that same part is making it run on automatic right this very second as you watch. Something under the hood in your body is making it all run on automatic. And to me, that's the true biological identity. Not who I think I am, but who I am. And as I said last time, nature is not on the side of the road. It's not something to look at on vacation. The road is cut through nature. Nature is the foundation. Nature is the default. The road is an artificial thing cut through it. And therefore, when you look at who you think you are, that is your personal road cut through your nature. And your nature being this big mind under the hood who reads the blueprint and differentiates the tissue and make it run on automatic. That's my default identity. My true consciousness resides there. The consciousness that has the power to change reality. This part is an appendage, like a finger or a fingernail. It's here for a purpose, but it's not actually me. It's a tool I use. But me, I, that's the big part. The part that we get in contact with when we have psychedelic experiences or extreme states of meditation, where it all makes sense, that I realize that I belong here, that I'm grown out of the world, not a visitor. Like the road is a visitor. So, back to the thing where, a photon is captured in a chloroplast, and all of these frequencies contained in the sunbeam are utilized in different ways by different chlorophyll molecules. Some feed on certain frequencies, some feed on others. But the frequencies that I don't use is a certain frequency of green, which bounces off and is reflected into our eyeballs, and that's why it looks green, because that's the frequency it's not using. Which brings us now to quantum brain, where quantum brain and quantum mind meet in the neurons at this little area right here, the synapse. It turns out that the synapse is the interface. Just as the leaf is the interface with the sun, this is the interface between, this here is the interface between the electromagnetic characteristics that a photon represents and the quantum field. The magnificence of how the neurons in the brain are connected to other neurons through thousands of axon connections. And every neuron has these axon wires that come out that connect to the wires of multiple other neurons. And where those wires connect is this interface between where one axon ends at its end plate and the next one begins. There's a gap there. And there's a neurochemical process of neurotransmitters that cross across this gap, so that whatever nerve signal is coming down this wire is going to continue or not. And it can even tell what quality of transmission is going to take place. And as I said before, that's in a previous live stream, I referred to the wall between the Newtonian physics world, the normal world that we experience, and the quantum world, our normal sort of world of things, and the quantum world that is not things at all, that's spooky and strange and weird. The wall between these two zones is the periodic table. And the elements of the periodic table represent the smallest particles of matter that can be identified with all their characteristics. Because just below that, at the other side of that wall, is just protons, electrons, and neutrons. On this side is sentences, and on this side is letters. And those letters are made of ink on a page, and when you look closely at the ink is made of dots, and the dots are made of smaller dots, on and on. But the interface in the brain is here between the Newtonian and the quantum, here at this gap. And the structures of neurotransmitters, the kind of neurotransmitters that you can see transmitting across this gap, is going to define what kind of information gets passed. And seeing as there's 8 different types, which once again aligns with the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, which form the 64 hexagrams, which is the 64 codons of the DNA. All of it begins once again to hold itself together, where here in the DNA we have 64 codons aligned with the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the oldest text on Earth, 5,000-year-old text. And we see that reflected here as well, where the the 8 types of neurotransmitters that form what is going to be passed. Adrenaline and noradrenaline, with these little definitions of each one. Dopamine, serotonin, well-being, happiness. GABA calms the nervous system. Acetylcholine, thought, learning, and memory. Glutamine, here, learning and memory and development and creative. Endorphins, feel good. This one, serotonin, tends to have special meaning for high levels of consciousness, as we'll see. But in the quantum realm, this concept that's coming up now is beginning our process. So prepare to stretch your mind just a little bit, because we have to follow this concept to understand how the mechanics of quantum mind actually work, how the quantum brain process, it's how our brain functions from an ordinary computer of zeros and ones to 0, 1, and maybe, where we have an infinite number of possibilities that all can be explored simultaneously at the same time, which involves quantum processes like entanglement and spooky action at a distance, and coherence of resonance like we have with brain waves, where millions of neurons are firing in sync with each other in waves of depolarization across the cortex. And it turns out that the speed of the depolarization has directly related to types of conscious states: beta, alpha, theta, delta, epsilon, gamma, default mode network, speed of depolarization of a coupled oscillator network sweeping across the cortex in a wave. So here, let's follow this down. So we have number 1. The biological molecule adenine triphosphate, ATP, the basic unit of energy of the cell, ATP, can release pyrophosphate made from 2 phosphate molecules. So we've got these 2 phosphate molecules that create this ATP. Each phosphate carries a quantum spin, and the 2 phosphates can become entangled with each other in that spin. And the phosphate entanglement will decay and fall apart. And so to preserve it, it gets protected. If the phosphates are grouped together into protective clusters, which are called a Posner cluster here, they get protected in a cluster, which are made of phosphate and calcium ions. The entanglement might survive for a longer time. So now we have a calcium molecule involved in stabilizing a quantum connection. If the pair of entangled phosphates split into different Posner clusters, where we have different phosphates in different clusters, they will remain entangled even as the clusters transport them far away from each other in the body or in the brain. In this way, the entanglement can be distributed over very long distances in the brain. This allows for the possibility of a quantum basis for brain function, where now we have entangled phosphates in neurons at all over the brain that are all entangled together, which are forming coupled oscillator networks, which is essentially the miniature version of what we're doing here. We're creating a macro network of whole brains, and those whole brains of all of us that are being synchronized up together and forming a massive coupled oscillator network is entangling us together, whether we like it or not. Everyone who has been watching these broadcasts and listening to the soundtrack and synchronizing our brains together and synchronizing our neuron networks together and synchronizing up the quantum entanglement networks into larger master networks where our brains form these quantum entangled pairs with everyone else. All of us have become a new quantum entangled network where our brains are now networked and linked together. We are influencing each other all the time. Just like the broadcast I did on Cleve Baxter's work with The Secret Life of Plants, where his intention of harm caused the plant to have an alarm response on his lie detector machine. And later, taking leukocyte scrapings from the inside of his cheek with DNA, putting it in a beaker with saline solution, and putting electrical field through that and stressing out the cell caused your body in another part of the building behind a closed door to have a stress response simultaneously to that on a lie detector machine. So this is a macro world quantum effect. A quantum effect of coupled oscillators linked at impossible distances, where the Newtonian view of reality would say that's not possible, but the quantum view would say, oh, this happens all the time. This is the normal state of events, because it's an illusion that my body begins someplace and ends somewhere. My cell is in this room and my body is in this room. My body is everywhere in the whole universe. And the fact that I think one is over here and one's over here is an illusion based on distance, and distance is based on time, and time is an illusion. Because all possible states and all possible things are contained in the moment, where it's the nexus point in the grand quantum field where everything is simultaneous to infinity in all directions, both backwards and forwards in time. Is that deep enough for you? But so where we have electrons and positrons and matter and antimatter and space and time as space-time, the quantum wave particle function forms a potential infinity of future possibilities at every point in space and at every moment in time, even forming electrical activity within the human brain. So the electrical activity of the neurons firing to the synapse is all possible neuron firings simultaneously and all possible neurotransmitters transmitting simultaneously, calculated all at once with every possible outcome, moment by moment by moment, in a quantum field generator. And that's what I believe is going on in the default mode network. With 95% of all brain function is the default mode, and only 5% off the top is you and me talking right now. What's going on down there? They know it's wool gathering and holographic fractal kind of mind function, consolidation of memories, and But I believe that it's where the quantum field is generating the next moment from now, over and over and over again, from a quantum field reality generator managed by infinite mind. The morphic field is the mind coming up with an expectation which translates itself out through this quantum computer reality generator, which then interacts with the quantum field and generates the next moment from now. Because my expectation gives the universe the path of least resistance, which is just what it's looking for, of which reality should I manifest here. I've got an infinite field. I don't know which one to choose. That's what I am choosing for the universe by my expectation. I think it should be this way. I think the universe should be a universe of things, made of smaller things, where science reigns and physical bodies look real, and I have things that all have little names. That's what I think the universe should look like. And therefore the universe goes, okay, that's path of least resistance. That's where I'm going. And we fall into it. It's so real. It looks so real. It's impossible to see through the illusion. It's like a hyperdimensional movie in 10 dimensions, where the level of detail is the pixels that make up the movie is quantum pixels, Planck length. You can't see through it. As deep as you want to go to look at more detail, the universe will dish up more detail for you to find. You'll never get a pixelated picture. It'll always be perfect. So that means that each of us stand at the very center of all things in the universe, all past and future events, all grades of smaller versus larger. It's an infinite universe of of every size you can imagine, infinitely larger into the super universal network, to the smallest particle you could ever imagine, forever in both directions. It places me always dead center in the middle, at the crux of everything. My viewpoint is what spins it all. And new discoveries that are happening now. Scientists discover biophotons in the brain that could hint our consciousness is directly linked to light. But what is light? Light is photons, the electromagnetic field that Einstein got, his only Nobel Prize for was his work in electromagnetism, E equals mc squared. He did not get, a Nobel Prize for his work with relativity. But this idea of seeing photons in brain processes, scientists found that neurons in mammalian brains, that's you and me, are capable of producing photons of light, or biophotons. There are biophotons in the brain on something light-based. Is something light-based going on? Of course it is. I describe Institute for Human Science with a electromagnetic shielded room made of copper. And you have equipment on the outside of this room through shielded ports, and the whole purpose of that was to create an electromagnetically shielded space and 100% dark space with no photons. So when you put a person in that room and you put a photon counter in the room and you measure the photons coming off of a body, you have 1 photon per second per centimeter squared. So every square centimeter has 1 photon coming off every second, all of your whole body. We're glowing with photons. We're issuing photons. Photons are coming out of us from the subatomic processes of life itself, where interactions at a quantum field generate electromagnetic fields, and electromagnetic fields generate photons as part of their reaction. So it's no surprise to see a, quote, discovery of photons issuing forth from the body, and particularly in the brain, where more electricity reactions are happening than any place else in the body. The the brain and the neurons and the synapses, the neurons and the synapses, is the maelstrom of electromagnetic activity. So, of course, yes, we're seeing photons issuing forth from the body. And these neurotransmitters, this neurotransmitter is the key to spirituality and higher consciousness. A team of Swedish researchers found that the presence of a receptor that regulates general serotonin, one of the neurotransmitters. Serotonin activity in the brain correlates with people's capacity for transcendence, the ability to apprehend a phenomenon that cannot be explained objectively. You know, scientists have long suspected that serotonin influences spirituality. They found that drugs known to alter serotonin, such as LSD, also induce mystical experiences. If this neurotransmitter is released in huge quantities into the body, the individual will reach higher states of consciousness. An immense feeling of joy and happiness takes over. Indeed, back in the 60s, when experiments were done legally with LSD and with psychiatrists, and that's where Timothy Leary got his start, and Dr. Richard Alpert, both psychiatrists. Alpert became Baba Ram Dass. Gunther Weil, who I knew personally. I met all three. Gunther Weil was a friend of mine. We were part of a Gurdjieff group together at one point. And Timothy Leary, I met later on in his years because he aligned with California Institute for Human Science, and I did the sound for his presentations. Ram Dass I saw a few times in the 60s in some of his talks, but I met him personally, but we didn't know each other. However, there were experiments done at that period of time to see if they could figure out what the heck is going on physically in the body with LSD. Such a micrograms, such an unimaginably small particle could cause such a massive change in personality, such a massive change in my perception of reality. And the sort of experiences people describe over and over and over again were what were described in mystical experiences through millennia from different cultures. And the idea that my ordinary personality, who I think I am, actually melts away. It evaporates. And what's left is big mind, who knows how to read the blueprint, who knows how to make the blueprint and make all this run automatic. That's the part that I meld with. And that part is deeply networked into universal reality and deeply networked into all other life forms on the planet, which are operating at that level. So all of a sudden I feel that I belong here, that I was grown out of here, that I'm not a visitor here, that I have a unique, in the present moment, grok understanding of what it's all about and how it all fits together. It all seems to be a sense. And I can't believe that I can't see it with this part. How I could miss it is right under my nose all the time. So that's a hallmark of these states that they're talking about with serotonin. Anyway, so they did all these physical processes of trying to analyze what happens in the physical body with something like LSD. And the only thing that they could see was massive levels of melatonin in the cerebrospinal fluid. Only physical response they could see. Melatonin, of course, is produced by the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is the only endocrine gland that produces its hormone into the cerebrospinal fluid and not into the blood. And, of course, is associated with the crown chakra. And descriptions of crown chakra opening is the same descriptions that they're making of serotonin and mystical experience and cosmic consciousness, and all of this starts to hang together. Where the pineal gland and melatonin down here is associated with serotonin. In other words, L-tryptophan goes through a series of chemical reductions where it forms these different, 5-hydroxytryptophan and then hydroxytryptophan HT serotonin, and then we get acetylserotonin, and serotonin is manufactured into melatonin. So we already know that serotonin is associated with cosmic consciousness type of experiences, and it's a main component of melatonin. And tryptophan is used to make serotonin, and therefore melatonin. Melatonin is ejected into the cerebrospinal fluid, which circulates around the brain, and massive levels of melatonin is associated with opening of the crown chakra and activation of the pineal gland, which seems to increase, for some reason, this melatonin. Massive levels of melatonin in the cerebrospinal fluid appear to be associated with massive levels of serotonin in the neurotransmitters that open them all up. Instead of a neurotransmitter deciding which of 8 of these neurotransmitters is going to pass across the synapse to continue the signal colored by a certain type of experience, LSD opens all of those channels to serotonin, opens all the doors and locks them open for serotonin, for the spiritual molecule, and charges the brain with melatonin and the whole nervous system. It charges it up. Described in ancient texts from the East, brought over by George Ivanovich Gurdjieff back in the 1920s, talked specifically about this. Second circulatory system of sacred blood, cerebrospinal fluid, which is indistinguishable from blood plasma. It's an electrolyte, exactly reversed from blood plasma. It is inside out and backwards spiritual blood. It flows on the outside of a solid nerve, and blood flows through the inside of a hollow tube. And all of this is this idea of, and remember at one point tryptophan was made illegal in the United States because we can't have too many people waking up. But it's also commonly known in the 60s that if you took supplemented yourself with tryptophan before you took an acid trip, then the trip would be much more powerful. Crown chakra, melatonin, pineal gland. Once again, the quantum brain connected to all elements through spooky act of a distance, infinitely small, infinitely large. Quantum brain, quantum mind. And here we have synaptic quantum effects. This calcium quantum effect occurs and becomes what has been called a quantum mixture of states. The theory is that one state could occur where the effect is determined, and another state could occur in which there are many different possibilities for action in the brain. This latter state would explain conscious free will and volition. So, it's like at the synapse level, it's a new sort of wall. It's the place where a Newtonian physics meets quantum physics, where linear processes meet an infinite field of all possible states. So at the synapse is the quantum computer in miniature, where all possibilities of all neurotransmitters are happening at once, and the quantum mind chooses through its expectation which of those is going to happen, because it knows its outcome. It knows all possible outcomes. So, here we have the neuron and the axon, and we have right here the interface between one axon and the next. It triggers the release of neurotransmitters. Which neurotransmitters are going to happen is a quantum field state of decision. And depending on which one comes through and attaches, the nerve signal continues. And remember, it's not just this one axon to one other neuron. It's billions of neurons. The more neuron connections, the more axon connections, the more neurotransmitters in a network, the more intelligent you are. Einstein's brain was 35% denser and heavier than normal brains. More axon connections, more neurotransmitters, more quantum field interactions. Seems to be all here. And then there's neuronal connections through oscillations. This idea of brain waves, that the oscillation of the firing of neurons is part of this process. The second postulated quantum effect involves cells affecting each other at a distance by oscillations, coupled oscillator networks. During specific behaviors or thought patterns, neurons from different parts of the brain oscillate together at large distances. Memory can be established by communication between two different brain regions that appear to be connected by oscillations, but no linear connections. Another finding is one in which visual memory in monkeys was clearly related to a synchronization of theta brainwaves between different regions. And as I said before, with the discovery of gamma brain activity at 40 hertz, gamma interacts with theta brain activity and lifts the information right out of the brain into a brain internet cloud. So the brain has an internet, wireless communication at it's kind of like, what, the brain has an internet? Whoa, that's amazing. And it's like, no, it's not amazing, because according to the principle of Gadifadib, where God did it first, anything that occurred to your mind has already occurred in the mind of God. It's already happened. Nature has already done it, did it first and did it better because it had eons to get it right. So of course the brain has wireless connections, and of course those connections oscillate together at a distance, sort of through the coupled oscillator network sort of idea. Thousands of connections at one moment, one subset seems to be connected and oscillating. The next instant, a different subset is firing and oscillating. It's every possible outcome calculated in the present moment, all based on this idea of coupled oscillators and biological synchronization, which I talked about at length. This was the Scientific American article from December 1993. You can still look it up and read the whole thing. It's mind-blowing. The underpinnings of sympathetic resonance and why brain entrainment works. And then there's microtubules. And this just goes on and on and on. This is going to be a multi-part series of exploring all of the ramifications of where this is going in quantum field processing in the brain. Microtubules is a huge subject and how it relates to that, because microtubules are a crystalline structure, and crystals have special properties, piezoelectric properties. They generate electromagnetic fields from distorting their shape. And remember, the pineal gland is chock full of these piezoelectric crystals. It's like a crystal radio set for tuning into different channels in the universe. I'm not going to go any further. Today we're going to have to pick that up next time, but we're going further and further down the quantum rabbit hole here with how this works and how my consciousness works and how we can commandeer that, how we can learn to control that, which is what meditation has been all about. Meditation has been a tool and technique that has been discovered by human beings all the way back in various cultures for thousands of years. How we synchronize up with the quantum field and mesh with it and control it by controlling our expectation, by penetrating into the deepest part of big mind, where the core idea about what this is all about resides. And when I meld with that, then I can surrender myself to the grand plan of what this is all about and what my purpose in it is. Me searching for the purpose of my life and what I'm here for, and the purpose of humanity and what we're all here for, and how we can bind ourselves together to manifest that principle as well and fall within the parameters of the grand plan for everything. So with that being said, the soundtrack today is, once again, we're going into the iota brain frequency. Last time was iota 1, which is super extremely low brain frequencies below the default mode network, which I think are synapsing with the, synchronizing up with the breathing rate of plants and trees. But I think if we go below that level, we synchronize up with something that is all biological life itself, beyond plants and trees, something common to all life forms. That's what we're trying to get to, and that's what the soundtrack is going. It's iota 2. So with that said, put your headphones on, and here we go. So here's where you can go to get that soundtrack. Quantum Brain Mind. And with that, next week we'll go deeper down this rabbit hole. Safe, be careful, be happy and healthy and holy, and I will